Thank you.
Tyler, they're coming on the 22nd to pick everything up. So I think it starts next month and then the artist stuff in March. This is the Texas.
And dated this year in March, what?
14th.
History is like a program that they program, especially during the arts and crafts weekend. So lots of arts and crafts friends is the PTA museum. Which is kind of fun. There is a university here, but it's not part of it. Yeah. But it's kind of similar to the other one, capitalism. But I found out the garage studio setup, and I mean, once it's set up with their stuff, it's like, it's just, well, it's cheap, I forgot about it, it really does. That doesn't matter.
If you want, thank you. On story. Yeah, on the stories. Really good.
Hey, I'm well. Are you all okay? Except for your cold? Where goes Bernie?
Welcome everyone. I'm Catherine Donovan, Curator of Education at Blacker Art Museum, and we're very thrilled to bring to you this panel discussion from the Uncanny In-Between. It's been great fun to see this work come to life, and we're so excited that it's here and that so many of the artists in the exhibition can join us for our panel discussion, which is moderated by Sora Kang, who is the curator at the Carnegie in Covington, Kentucky, and also the exhibition's curator. Joining us here today, too, are artist Wantu Kim, Poon Lee, Haewon Sung, Payun Zerl, and also collaborator Jordan Tate. Everyone will kind of informally introduce themselves. We're excited because these artists have all traveled from kind of across the country to be here, from Philadelphia to Clarksville, Tennessee, to Michigan and Ohio. So and we're thrilled about that. And we're going to do this format. It's going to be a panel discussion and give us a little information about the show. Just to tell you a little bit is that it's going to be up through March 14th, spring break. So we do have a time to explore it later on our own. So thanks to everyone for being here today.
Hi, I'm Sora Kang. Thank you for coming today. So I'm going to give a little background information about this exhibit. There's a lot of layers to it if you haven't read the catalog. But the image that you're seeing is obviously not the show that's in the other room. But this show actually started in 2023. The show that you're seeing now is another iteration of this exhibition that was a part of the Insika Ceramic Festival that happened in Cincinnati, where we originally had 15 Korean artists, and the exhibition was about exploring bicultural identities. And it was really interesting to me because all of us are bicultural in a different way. We're all of Korean descent. We have all immigrated to the US at different points. And I feel like there's a lot of nuances in terms of how we can kind of cull from our culture and also depart from it. And a lot of the artists kind of exhibit this through the way that they make, which I thought was fascinating. And this being tied to a ceramic festival, it was up for about 3 weeks, and we worked so hard on it, and we were so sad it was about to be over. And during like that last week run, Jordan Tate, who is at the University of Cincinnati, he runs NFT Media Lab there, asked if I'd be interested in collaborating with them on a project. Jordan and I both do not like NFT art, even though this is called the NFT Media Lab, but we had conversations about maybe what the resources were that they had, what would be interesting in terms of maybe like a digital extension or a digital presentation. So Jordan, you talked a little bit about, we don't use the word NFT, we call them digital assets. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So the NFT, for those of you who aren't aware, the term is non-fungible token. It's essentially a mechanism by which many artists found some success selling digital work during the pandemic. There was some assumption that this was a novel process, even though it was not. I think it was new to the cultural imagination that digital art could be sold, but I mean, they were selling animated GIFs at the Armory Fair in 2011. So it wasn't anything fundamentally new. The university wanted to be sort of on the cutting edge, so they founded an NFT Media Lab and asked me to run it. And I think as Sora pointed out, I have quite a bit of skepticism there. So we started to think about ways in which the digital object could actually be functional, beneficial, and novel, rather than just something. So Sora and I sort of talked about this term of the digital asset, and Sora articulated this really well yesterday, because the objects in the hallway are not the art objects. They are representations of the art objects created in a way that is intended to allow a different type of interaction with them, with more depth, less fragility, and a sort of more portability and access. So yeah, it's in no way related to the sort of cryptocurrency, non-fungible token. Nothing that happened on the blockchain. And it was just a really interesting way to collaborate with a curator who I've known and respected for a long time.
And it's interesting to think about translating a ceramic exhibition into having a digital collaboration with it. I mean, ceramics inherently is so material based, and it's tactile, and it's so fragile. And I feel like that was an entry point for me, because in this exhibition, I was actually surprised that some of the artists were already thinking within a digital scope. So Hannah, who is right next to me, actually had a digital presentation of one of her works in the original exhibition. And Wansu had a material constraint with the interactive component to his work in the exhibition as well. So thinking of how can a digital extension actually help us interact with the work and actually study it better. So this piece, it comes in two halves. So it was intended to be viewed where you walk up to the piece, you open it, and you see all these intricate drawings on the inside. But as you know, when you walk into a gallery space, you can't touch the ceramic. And it makes this most awful sound when ceramics hits another piece of ceramic work, you know? And it's terrifying. So of course, they were just displayed side by side, and even people walking up to look inside of it would scare me, you know? So we thought with Jordan before the show closed, like, how about we experiment and scan this piece and see how it goes? So that was the entire start to this exhibition, was choosing 5 artists that were thinking digitally or who could benefit from digitization. So this is the very first scan that Jordan did, and you can see all of these intricate drawings. If you scan the QR code in the hallway for one, where you can actually zoom in to see all these individual drawings. And I love that Wansu's work is so playful. This is the work that is in the exhibit right now, one of his like monstrous table forms. And I wanted to ask Wansu, like, I feel like playfulness is a through line between a lot of the works in this exhibit, but I know with your work it's very prominent. Like whether it's with the drawings or with the forms, like what does that mean for you?
Hi, I'm Wansu. I made those works. So playfulness, well, first of all, I want to have fun in my studio making work, but then coming from South Korea, having Korea as a cultural identity, and then my education and background, my knowledge all started back there when I was an undergraduate student, and then studying ceramics in certain ways, knowing the tradition or history. When I moved here, I felt that those knowledge, information, or whatever I got from Korea, it was my huge inspiration to start finding who I am. But then at the same time, over a decade, it also has become some kind of boundary or like a restriction in certain ways. So I have like bittersweet feeling towards my cultural identity that I'm trying to like navigate like who I am based on my culture, also based on like who I really am. Just looking at my surroundings. So and then I thought about monster as a theme. And when I think of monster, I don't have to define. I don't have to like say, oh, mouth has to be here. It has to have body. It has to have face. So that having freedom, and that I really like that moment in my studio. So I created this body of work, a table monster, that I shows a little bit of my cultural identity, but then at the same time that I really play with my intuition in making process. Try to not define the monster, but like define my own monster version at the same time. So that playfulness in the work really have a significant impact in my practice. Yeah.
One other question I have, which I saved, I didn't even ask him in person, because this is a 3D scan, which is why we can see it split, but how did you actually draw into the vessel? Like how were you able to even see? Because it's so symmetrical, like I was surprised when we saw it split like this,
Okay.
how even everything looked.
First of all, I put some eye drops in my eyes. My eyes wanted to dry. That's totally kidding. And then, well, a lot of my vessels have interior decorations. So sometimes it has a like really small opening, and I have to figure out like where to cut and then how to put together, or how I can access inside. And most of the times I just being really awkward with my arm, with my body position, and then do my best with, there's a color underglaze pencil, there's a like a brush that I can work on with cobalt or just blue glaze colors, and then just try to concentrate, and then like have some sore arms for about a couple days, and then start from the bottom, and then like coming on top, because I don't want to ruin it by touching it. So so I kind of plan it, and then I also follow my intuition a little bit. I change my plan in the process, and then I followed it, my intuition again. So I bottom to the top, and then glaze over. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I mean, I have a feeling you're freehand drawing it, but I'm just trying to imagine you do it now. No, I think it's
I'll take
interesting.
a photo and then just send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me. I wish we could have included here. I mean, ceramics is such a traditional medium, especially like in the context of Korean culture. It's also very precise when I think about how like the firing techniques are like the math that goes into making these things come out of the kiln in full heats. So it's interesting how everyone is very, very precise in what they do, but they're also extremely subversive in terms of technique or form, and I think that's where that playfulness comes through. And another artist, Hanyun, who was in the original exhibition. So I learned a lot about Korean cultures through the artists in this show. So this is called a chapsang figure, which I'll let Hanyun explain further. But a reason why I chose Hanyun for this show was he actually took, used a Korean database that already had 3D scans of historical artifacts, where he was able to make a 3D print and make a mold from to recreate this very real artifact that exists in Korea on top of a palace, and was able to recreate it. And you see these motifs being represented in his work in the other room. So you see like the chapsang figure up here and down below. This is a 3D scan of the original that he had in the previous exhibition. But I wanted to ask you, Hayun, can you talk a little bit about that process of you finding that 3D scan, and also can you talk a little bit about what a chapsang is?
Yeah, okay. My name is Hayun, and then I'm really glad to be here. So the definition of chapsang is like basically is a form of guardian, and then you can see it often on top of the traditional Korean houses. Back in time, those traditional houses were all made out of wood, so sometimes they get burned by the fire. So the people wanted to apply their hope to these little guardians as they're placing on top of the roof, so that the house can be protected from being caught by the fire. Yeah. So actually, the chapsang, in historical fact, the chapsang is actually one of the oldest, the guardian form. Yeah, in Korea. Yeah, the people are actually starting to apply the wishes to it. Yeah. So that kind of like means a lot to me. And then also, there's a lot of different form of chapsangs. And then the specific form that I choose is the only human form. Yeah. So the way how it's just like, I guess it's like the process of making the work is really through all the coincidences. Yeah, we happen to find the spark in the situation of some sort of objects, and then the idea just grows from it. So my life in America has been, it becomes longer and longer, and then I found it is actually more fascinated. I found myself finding more fascination in my Korean culture. Like once I remove myself from the environment, I get more fascinated to it. Yeah. So I found this chapsang in a database, and then what if I recreated it? Yeah. So people sometimes they think that it's just like kind of concept of the ready-made. Because like it's already pre-existing form, and then I'm trying to apply my own perspective. But my perspective is a little bit different because it already has been completely break down in the digital format. Yeah, it started with the bits actually. Yeah, and then I kind of rematerialize it. And as it going through the rematerialization, you're also achieving this process of recontextualization. Yeah, So for me, it's like completely different form. It's because the time and then this place where when I make it, where I make it is different. Materials is different, and also the glaze is different. Right? Yeah. So, but yeah, so I printed out with the 3D printer first, and then so it becomes a plastic prototype simply, and then I make a mold out of that, and then I just switch the material to the color. So it sounded easy, right? Yeah, but yeah, there's some challenges because I need to still be able to refine this like details and everything. But yeah,
Which you can see for sure, like from the first one you made to the ones that you have in the gallery.
Oh, what's the question?
Oh, no, I was just.
Oh, okay.
No, I love when I see this piece in the States, if you see the Chumsum figure that's like laying down below, and how it feels like very precariously placed. It almost feels like it's holding the ledge up. And it ties to Audrey's piece. Did you all notice the little frog? So this is, it's a rocking chair, and it does rock back and forth. That frog is the only thing like that's keeping it still. And it's interesting that a lot of the artists here are pulling from furniture, domestic, utilitarian objects, which I think makes sense because ceramic is also a vessel of something that we all use. We all use cups or plates. It's something that's tactile that we're familiar with. And with Audrey's work, I think what we see, well, what I do know is we're looking at pairs, but of course this is like a linguistic pair, spin on the word pair. So I'm sure everyone recognizes the larger pair as a pair form. I think in American context we know this. I'm sure some of you are wondering what the smaller fruit is, and I think everyone on this panel, we all know that that's a pair. Some people call it a Korean pair, others might call it an Asiatic pair, but this is like a play on language. So when we say the word pair, what image immediately comes to mind? And depending on your culture, that image is going to be different. And I think for Audrey, it's very much her being bicultural. It's like a simple, straightforward representation of that. And also, she embeds an image into the body of the chair as well, in that fabric. And it transitions from Alfred University to Seoul. These are like two locations that are sentimental to her. So it's really subtle, but it's there, and it makes you wonder what you're looking at. And I think as you like look at the wall label or something, it gives you a little bit more depth. And again, on the nuances of how a lot of us who are bicultural code switch so often, and we exist between cultures or between languages. And that sort of linguistic play made me think of Hewon. With her work, I would say is the most ambiguous out of all the works. There's something about it that feels quite abstract, which I think is lovely. And I think it's important that we have works that aren't like overtly representative. Like you would never look at this and say like a Korean artist made it, but a Korean artist did make it. And I think it's fascinating because you're taking the mold making process, which is so inherent to ceramics, and this idea of creating multiples and creating perfection, but you're almost deconstructing that process, which I will ask you about. But I will say, like with Hewon's work, mold making is very important, and the failure of mold making is important. And you don't know what this is until you read the wall label, and when you see that it's called Snow Angel, you immediately make the connection of the impression of a snow angel or the movement that you would make with your arms and legs to make a snow angel. And I like that when you read the wall label, everything starts to make sense. But you're still left with the question of, what is this made out of? And how is it made? So I wanted to ask Ellen, what is this made out of? How is this made?
So I'll take that as a question, a curiosity to the process. Or I'll maybe start with the title, and a confession with the title is that I no longer vibe with the title that I have in the selection space. But I think, that speaks to the different pieces that are present in my studio. I'm very much process-oriented in how I come across my objects. I don't go through this trajectory of setting a goal or a design in mind and then kind of, reaching that through a construction process.
conceptualize the process itself. So the work that comes out of my studio are either an excavation or discovery or even a byproduct of what I'm doing in the studio. So that also connects with my relationship with the concept of craft. I think craft is both a noun when you're thinking of it as like a crafted object. But for me, craft is very much a living process. It's about the doing of the material knowledge that you hold. Sometimes it does end up in taking the form of a functional object or a sculptural form, but at the same time, there's so many forms that are becoming in the process that I kind of want to shed light on. So in that sense, titling is also a concurrent practice that I have in my making process. You know, there's the making, the physical making. Titling is somewhat, it's a conceptualization for me. How do I make sense of these abstract or non-specific forms in this new language that I build in my studio practice? So by the time where a work is extracted from my studio and then presented in an exhibition, it usually takes like a month or two of time in between. So the concept that I build through this particular form also evolves. So when I kind of re-encounter my work in an exhibition space, it seems very foreign and familiar. So I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but I think it just, I'm trying to articulate the temporality that I'm kind of acknowledging in my sculpture. Like for example, this bottle of water, it's spilled and it's a still life, but at the same time it holds so many movements. It's going to be, I'm going to be drinking out of it, it's going to be poured, it's going to be empty and then crushed at the same time, but at this moment it's just a object as is. But I try to acknowledge the becoming of it and what it's going to become. You were talking about, I'll get into mold making a little bit. Maybe that will give a little bit more technical explanation of how the forms become. So I do think of myself as a ceramic artist, not because the work I create is presented in ceramics, but clay and ceramics is a very vital element in my studio. So I work through slip casting and mold making. I use a lot of raw clay in order to achieve the textures, the refined textures in my plaster castings. But I look for moments of failure so I can kind of capitalize on top of that. So slip casting, people know slip casting mostly through the industrial lens where it's used to create these mass-produced objects. It's more precise and they're more, the products that come out of it are identical, but I use these processes that are designed for mass production and quality control as a way to actually achieve the opposite, where I want to create one of a kind. So in order to do that, I noticed that instead of trying to approach the process in the conventional way, I need to discover or even design failure in order to build a system upon that, and then turn that into a system of production. So in that sense, if you're aiming for failure, anything you do within that concept, it becomes a success. And then this idea of like, what is a failed object? What is a successful object? It kind of becomes interchangeable, or the boundary almost becomes non-existent. So hopefully technically that gives a little bit more insight behind the work that I presented. There's another piece in the presentation, but if you enter the gallery, it's the piece on the right being on the wall. So most of my work, I would say, and it does get categorized as an abstract object just because it's not immediately recognizable. But interesting enough for me, they're very specific objects. They're broken molds that's been reinserted into my process. And then I make a mold of a mold. And then I make a mold of a mold, and then that gets repeated. So these are forms that kind of like evolves through that mold-making process that involves construction and reconstruction. So they're actually, to me, or within my studio ecosystem, they're very specific and concrete objects. They're not just like random or organic forms. They used to have a specific function. It's just that they're performing in a different way. So I kind of enjoy that distance that I have from more my broken molds. The original molds kind of like repeats the process. It loses the originality, but it kind of gets reborn into this new context. So yeah, this work, if it comes down from the exhibition, you never know, you might see the ghost of it. I might reinsert this and then break it, make a mold out of it. So yeah, basically like most of the work that I document or you see in the exhibition is really living just in that moment temporarily. So I don't really, there's no such thing as like permanency in my work.
No, I love the ambiguity of the objects, but how specific your process is to achieve something that we may interpret as abstract. And on the other end is Hoon Lee's work, which I feel like there's so many recognizable forms and so many entry points into his work as a Celadon dog with all of these intricate masks that are on display. And they're presented a little bit differently than the way that we had them originally in the first exhibition. And watching Hoon snap these masks on the dog is kind of nerve-wracking for me, but you're the artist, and I feel like all the ceramic artists here, because you guys handling their own work, you guys are all rocking with your own work. They're just rubber bands, they like snap on. He was like, oh, he's like, should I put more masks on here? He had 5 masks on the dog, and he even put like another mask on the bird. And I like all this like play, this hiding of identities within identities, where I wasn't even sure what the dog actually looked like, with totally naked without any masks. But the digital piece that you can play with in the hall, you see it just as is before you start layering these masks on. But I remember having a conversation with Hoon on the phone about, what's with these masks, or what do they mean? And we talked about this idea of play, and you talked about as a kid having paper masks that you used to play with or cut out. Can you talk a little bit about that and why the image of this dog is important to you?
Hi, I'm the one from Michigan. I don't know why dogs are important. I don't think it's important. I love dogs.
You like dogs.
I do like dogs. And then I travel a lot, so whatever reason I do some different residence programs, international. And then wherever I go, especially like India, Italy, China, or Thailand, or even Korea back then. And then often I see some animals, because I love dogs, so you see the street dogs and things. And then I do study a little more, why they all look alike, I don't know if you've seen any kind of Asian street dogs, they all look alike. Super pointy, short hair is kind of yellowish, they're curly long tails, And then I found that there was a specific breed, one of the oldest one in India, they call In-Dog. Actual India in-dog. It goes about 3,000 years history everywhere. I can do something, than just meet my dogs, I can make some little dogs. And then I find out that when I was in Italy, actually talking about that, I never remember the name of it, the wolves, feeding their 2 twin boys, So going back to that history as well, just collecting those things together and tying them together, my own way, my history. Those masks. I don't know, any of you guys played that? It's like, I didn't have enough money to buy toys, I guess, and then after my mother drew some kind of like a superhero's mask on the cardboard and things, and they just cut out those things and they put the yellow rubber band in the ear so you can actually, some of you guys minding that. So I'm doing that to my dog. Do you want to be a rabbit? I'll make a rabbit and oh, you want to be human? I do that. Do you want to be a baby? I can cast baby face and then put it up. You want to be a pig? I'll cut, I'm doing that to my dog. But except for the plunger thing, so. That day I was so drunk. So I put the plunger in my, just stuck up here, and then I had a fun time for a while. Got to do it for my dog as well, so I cast it. And then those some of the images, so we call the decal process. Some of you guys might know this visual image transfer processing ceramics. So I do little printmaking, like little etchings and things. So I create some images whenever I go to different countries, and then I transfer that image as a decal print and then apply that on demand. So you see that just a little like little drawing piece.
No, I think this speaks to how there's a playfulness in the way everyone is approaching ceramics. And with me, I think like before I ever curated a ceramic show, I always interpreted it as something like there is such a seriousness to it. Because there's again like a fragility and there's a precision and how you need to fire something and how one thing off can destroy an entire thing that you spend so much time on. So it's nice to see that balance with a lot of humor and play in the way everyone kind of navigates their own practice. But I think this is a good place to open things up for a Q&A. If anyone has any questions for the artists or any of the works in the show, please feel free to ask. Yes.
Thank you all. It's been really, I love hearing you talk about your own work, especially in ceramics, which doesn't often lend itself to kind of theorizing and critical, even in a playful, critical way. My question is simply the relationship between the digital two-dimensional images and ceramics and the kinds of play that could be an in-between in terms of scale, right? Because when we see them in reproduction, we lose a sense of the actual scale, and that's kind of also something I find very interesting because they can be quite small or actually quite large, right? So maybe if scale has something to do with the way that some of you think about the so-called original and then its copy as a digital image.
Are you speaking about the digital assets that are in the hallway?
Exactly.
Yeah. Have you tried the QR code?
No, not yet. No.
So if you do the QR code, because the ones that are on display, minus Hoons, it's like a video, but the QR code makes it interactive. And a big thing for us was also attaching the actual information on the object that gives its dimensions and its material, the artist's bio, and we can attach more and more information to the digital file too, so that people will know the exact scale or the exact material of the actual physical object. But those are just more like extensions or like a sophisticated form of documentation for people to be able to study. So to be able to zoom in or make it larger is for the purpose of being able to see something maybe a little bit more clearly. So like Hoon's decal images, maybe the math on them, the numbers that you see are too small, but on the screen you can zoom in and actually be able to make it all legible. So I don't know if that answers your question, but so less about like that being a precise in terms of scale or anything like that. That's in the object information, but not in the actual digital product.
I mean, it just seems to me that each artist might have a sense of how they expect the work to be interpreted, because when it's not actually in its three-dimensional form, and then if there's some sort of play in between the expectations and the actual scale of the form when it's actually seen.
I think that's the benefit of the software could benefit that the relationship between the object and the viewer. I mean, you were talking about the sense of scale, and then, I think whenever I walk into the gallery or the museum, there's a sense of hierarchy that I see between me as a viewer and the objects, right? So there's some small works naturally allowing me to see more details to it. I want to get close to it. But if there's large works, I want to go back, and then appreciate the scale of it. So right now, with the space itself, yes, we are seeing those digital formats within the small screens, but yeah, I mean, what happened if we can just enlarge it as big as this building? And what if if there's a screen can put that? I think that could be phenomenal too. Yeah. So I think because it's a bits, right? So it can be any sizes. So I think that's actually quite potential that it falls in. So, yeah.
I do the same thing. I don't know whether it's the same scale you're talking about, but at the same time, you can scale in that piece inside of your hand. I think that's more critical for me, not necessarily size-wise, but can you control the scaling in my hand? So,
That's the sense I was thinking, because like painting, we think of large format or small format. Murals or something about ceramics that contains a kind of intimacy that unless it's held in the hand,
Right.
doesn't have the meaning that.
yeah, so that's why I feel, that part, you're inside of your hand.
I can't stop thinking about the idea when y'all were talking about the snow angel, that you left out the word shadow. When you were talking about it. And when I saw the title with the piece, the thing that I looked at the most was not only the fact that it said snow angel, not impression, it's not just snow angel, it's snow angel's shadow. And immediately saw the shadow it was making, and looked at it as if it's the shadow. And so I found it also curious that neither one of you mentioned that when you were talking about that piece, used the word shadow.
Yeah, I think the use, so the snow angel, I think is a bit more straightforward with the form that the piece has. Shadow was kind of like a nod to both, like in a very one-dimensional way, the color of the work, but at the same time, it's kind of like nodding to or hinting to the process of how I think about positive and negative. Because the work that's on display, it's a cast, so it's a positive what we're seeing, but at the same time, in the process, it also works as a negative space that I'm kind of like materializing. So it was, it's not very logical, I would have to say. Like I'm using language to somewhat translate the grammar and the language that I dealt in my studio practice. So there's definitely a lot of like gray area between how the title and the word corresponds. I've been holding on to, we're like reading this book titled Exophony. It's written by Yoko Tawada, and she's a Japanese German writer. And Exophony is a new concept for me. I think it's mostly used in literature where there's immigrant literature, and then she kind of she's using the alternative term exophonic literature. Exophony meaning someone who has a general experience outside of their mother tongue, and then she talks about both in literature but also just like language in general. And she mentioned something about translation where there's no such thing as a wrong translation. There's only accurate translations and translations that are a little bit adjacent to the actual meaning. So I think the title does that for me, where I can't really use language to fully represent or communicate the ideas that are in the work, because then why would I use art as a way of communication? But it's just adjacent enough that you can probably, you have your own way of navigating the world, like your logic with the world, and then it's going to be clashing with my title, and that clash in the gray area that you notice is actually where the work is activated.
And that's exactly what happened when you used that word shadow for me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the iconography in Illinois?
Iconography. Yeah, actually, so did I mention about iconography? Okay, yeah, of course. I think that it was from our conversation here. So the work that I am making over there is actually the collection of all the previous work, and then I kind of like wanted to make the work that can combine everything. Because I believe always the next work comes from the previous works, and then I want to kind of like put it all in together. So I only explains about the Guardian piece, which is also part of iconography. I believe all the art piece has a quality and a function as an icon. So the icon is like we put a symbol, and then behind of that, it has a meaning to it. So the landscape piece I called, it looks like a boat. It's like the project that I made after done with my landscape pieces. Actually, sort of, can you go back to the first image? All the way in the first of your slides. So if you can see that the black pedestals on top of it, and then those are actually landscape pieces that I made a previous version of the current work that I showed in the gallery right now. So the idea actually started with the landscape is the transcendental property of nature, the landscape that, I practiced as a potter first. And then it started with just like small vessel forms. And then if you hold the small vessel form, there's such intimacy. And then I also see the relationship between the interior and the exterior. But the surface of the exterior also becomes a part of the interior of the larger space, which could be a studio. And then we can go on and on and on, like from the studio to the school, and then to the town, and then I reach to the landscape. Yeah, and then so the landscape for me is like the ultimate, like a container that contains me, and then constantly giving me a guideline or some sort of like inspiration guiding me through. Yeah, so wherever I go, whether I'm in Texas, I'm in San Angelo right now, and also I spent some time in the Appalachian Trail area, in Ohio, Kentucky area. There's a landscape, and then even like middle of nowhere, if I'm seeing those like a landscape, I had an immediate connection because there's nature everywhere. Yeah, so especially the Appalachian Trail, the mountain, if I see it, even though I'm middle of nowhere, I have immediate connection to my hometown in Korea because Korea is also consists with 80% of mountains. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of like tag that that journey and then put it into the icon and then somewhat simplify it. Yeah, so, and then I put that landscape piece on top of the boat shape so that it can have some sense of buoyancy, but also eluding that it also performs as a form of transportation to connect my memory to different places. Yeah, so, yeah, but I don't know if I could answer that question. Yeah, so the iconography is a really strong, the way how we see the world, and then I think the art is what we utilize it. I mean, even in the commercial world, like we see the Apple logos and the Nikes and then all these McDonald's logos, but we just don't see its shape. Whenever there's a logo pops up, we also see other meanings behind of it. Yeah, so that's kind of the power of the icon that I wanted to apply to my work as well. Yeah, what do you see? Like if you see my work, it doesn't have to have a definite answer, but I mean that's the art world, right? Even the Guardian piece as well, it has the original meaning to it, but I regenerated it in. I'm kind of still wanting to hone the meaning of like performing as a guardian and a reflection of myself. But what are you actually thinking, right? You're coming from we're all coming from different backgrounds, and then the cultures, and then if you see that Chapsang figure, yeah, we picked up on different meanings to it.
I have a question on Audrey's work, even though she's not here, but she's discussed it with you. I noticed that the American pear is so much bigger than the Korean pear, but in reality it's the opposite. I was just curious, did you ever talk about why she made the American pear so much bigger?
Honestly, she's never told me why it's so much bigger. So I can't speak on her behalf, whether that was like a conceptual thing or just like a formal process, but I do like the way that they sit on this chair.
I was wondering if you could talk about the monster in your work, and you mentioned that when you're working, you're maybe changing your plan as you go, and so like that work that's in the show is going between table or shelf and monster and back and forth, and I don't know, I'm just kind of curious how that works in the studio or how it feels to be very open, but then having these two things that are coming out in the work as you go.
Yeah, so I, after I make one version of the monster, and then I try to make different monster based on it, like not try to copy or any forms or texture, and then I often put the tabletops on top, just show a monster as a support, as a vertical support, and table can sit on it. So there's like a function of the table, but there's also the function of monster holding the table. So I want to just based on that, I think a lot about like monster as a vertical support. So that's like my just an initial like plan in my mind, and then I just keep moving on and on, making another monsters and another monsters after that. And then for this specific monster, it was made after I created some other monsters that have more Korean symbols in it. So I wanted to entirely remove that and then really focus on the monster and then table and merging it together. And this piece I made it during the pandemic, and then there was I wanted to talk about communication. I wanted to talk about interaction. So interactions, I wanted to make two pieces like sitting together and then creating some like sharing space with those three tables. Now I'm making more table monsters having human forms. So I have a transition moment that I look at a lot of like just furniture, but I look at like body form as a furniture now. So I'm making a lot of bigger tables and combining with more monsters. Yeah.
I mean, the monsters are, like, these monsters are pretty friendly, already, but then to make them functional like that, it becomes even more friendly or something.
Yeah.
So, so I guess that I'm really thinking about that as like what is that saying about the monster, or like what is the function of the monster without the table and then with the table.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So more as the thing with some kind of like a function as a like a with its verticality structure, like, and I think that's like one thing I know about my monster. But then I'm also like studying a lot of my monsters and keep questioning about like what it is.
Yeah.
In the process of making.
If I can follow up on Anna's question, friendliness, I think, is important to the title of the show, because unfriendliness is the uncanny, right? And to what degree maybe each of you identify with the in-between, the diaspora, displacement, because those are all forms of the familiar and the unfamiliar, right?
Diaspora, uncanny, what was the other word? Unfamiliarity.
The friendly, the unfriendly,
Yeah.
the familiar, the strange, the
between.
extonia that you brought up.
Right.
Yeah.
I think for myself, I came to this point where I enjoy existing within that gray area. I don't feel as much as I'm in between, but I think that in between space in itself kind of deserves a name that's not referential to like in relation to others. So like, Korea and the United States, yes, like they're countries that I've been migrating back and forth, but it's not the transition of the place that becomes a definition or how I see my identity, but it's just the action of moving around. So I kind of have when I get labeled as a diaspora, that concept doesn't quite sit with me right. Maybe because the moving itself for me was more of a voluntary and active decision. I think there's a lot of connotation of like unwilling displacement and a longing for the home.